in listen-only mode.
I can't hear what they're saying. Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Lance French. I'm the Marketing Director for W&M Environmental, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar on Regulatory Applicability Screen, or what we call a RAS. Our speakers today are W&M's Don DeRivage. DeRivage, did I say that right? I always say it wrong. And Jennifer Adams. Welcome, guys. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, Lance.
You can talk.
We're ready to be.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Before we get started, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. If you guys have questions, please send them to me through the chat tab on your GoToWebinar window. If we don't get to your questions, I'll make sure to see that these guys will get it and get an answer to you really soon. We are recording this webinar, and it'll be available to rewatch later this afternoon or to share it with your friends. That would be awesome. Along with the slides that we are using. So I will send you an email with a link when they're made available. So that's enough out of me. So guys, first of all, I want to introduce you to the audience. So Don, go ahead and introduce, you're our Fort Worth Regional Manager, is that correct? Or Division Manager?
Close Division Manager, and I don't think titles really mean a whole lot, but one thing that I think is critical, at least in hopefully when I bring to the RAS issue, is the fact that auditing is what I've done in the past, and achieved certification to that here back in 2013. Maintain it and like it. I think it's real critical to how we maintain not only professionality to the whole issue of regulatory screening, but also just in general about going forward to make sure we have all the clients maintained with the right answers.
Okay, excellent. Jennifer, tell us your background.
I spent about 8.5 years in the industrial sector in the ready-mix concrete business. And I was responsible for the environmental compliance for a bunch of little ready-mix plants, or big ready-mix plants, and it'd be nice to them. So I have a lot of experience walking around these plants and trying to figure out what exactly applies to them and how they can stay in compliance.
Okay, well, great. Well, and so you guys have done a lot of what we're talking about.
Yes.
A lot of people probably don't know what a RAS is, so that's kind of going to be my first question is why would I want to do a regulatory applicability? We're going to call them RAS from here on out because regulatory applicability screen is a lot. So, but okay, so who would request this? Who needs this or who wants this? So, Don?
And my experience goes into the oil and gas industries as well as light and heavy manufacturing, and even into some of the aerospace things, and from a work point of view. And I can tell you that having been on the other side of the desk as an environmental manager, when you first come into that facility, you're a little bit confused, excited, and trying to get your feet on the ground. And indeed, this is what this does. This gives you the applicability of what this facility and the activities that you do. So it's for that new manager, it's for that seasoned professional who's been there a while, but maybe, hey, we're about ready to bring in a new process. Maybe we need to look at this to make sure it has all the bells and whistles.
That's a really good point. No matter how much experience you have, there's so many environmental laws out there. There is always going to be something that you've missed, or that someone with a different type of experience is going to point out, hey, you know what, your facility needs this. Lance, I want to show you something. If you go to the next slide and hit it again. So I tried to, it's fine. I tried to go look up a number on the total of environmental regulations in the U.S. and then in Texas alone. And there is no number. I could not find a number. I found an estimate, 300 to 400,000 in the U.S. Not sure that source, but regardless, this kind of shows, this is just TCQ, this side right here, and it's supposed to scroll up. These are just the headlines of the rules in Texas, the environmental rules in Texas that facilities are required to comply with. Now, they may not all apply to you, but these are the list that we have to go through to see what might apply. And I have an example on the next slide. This is a ready-mix concrete plant. Oops, that's fine. So obviously ready-mix is my background. I know a lot about these plants. So this little list on the side, these are just the categories: air, stormwater, wastewater, public water supply, solid waste, SPCC, and so on. So within each of those categories is a long list of potential regulations. If we go to the next little piece real quick. Just in air alone, there are the potential permits by rule, one of the smaller air permits that could apply to a ready-mix plant. Next one. And there's a selection of 3 potential standard air permits. And failing that, if none of those apply, there is a new source review. And this is just, you can go ahead again. This is just air for one ready-mix concrete plant, which on the industrial scale is a relatively small operation.
Oh, you're so right. I take it, in the bigger industries that are more energy related and even the ones that are not, you can get the same kind of questions about, well, my gosh, is an air permit a permit by rule, or is it a new source review, or is it, God help us, a PSD permit that will really be a longer effort? The good news is that you can find out right away. And when you find out right away, then you begin to understand and begin to alert even upper management. What do I do next? What's the right thing for me to do?
So that's a crazy amount of rules.
It's a lot of rules.
That's a lot of rules. So what actually is a RAS? What is it? What is that? What are we talking about here? What is that?
Well, this comes from the auditing experience. I certainly learned a lot about what professional auditors do and those that do with the risk management auditing, which is probably most prevalent out there, but from ISO to responsible care to all the rest, what a RAS is not is probably worthwhile saying, and that it is not an audit. And I think that's real critical. The difference we'll explain later, because I think the audience and everyone participating needs to understand that's not what we're trying to do here. The RAS is that tailored environmental assessment that makes getting into details left for later, but certainly can assess what the compliance status is to a high level degree, and then be able to say to the client and have the client take away, this is my to-do list, and this is where I need to go either get some help or staff up for what I need to get done.
Go to the next one. Next slide. Okay. So
Talk through the process of a RAS. Don, you want to start?
Yeah, well, so when you start talking about a RAS, the way we like to do it, and certainly the way I like to do it, and there's all kinds of different starting points, but one of the first points is to meet with the client and talk with the client about what exactly do you want to see, and you folks out there listening, I'm sure you've run into the idea about, well, I don't want necessarily my whole process involved, or maybe I want to have a specific activity, or maybe they're going to be throwing this new process at us. We're going to incorporate this, and that's what we really want to see what applicability is. And that's the great thing about a RAS; it can be tailored for exactly that. And once the client and we get involved to at least agree to what is appropriate, then we go down the road of a standard protocol where we're going to do a site visit. And the site visit is all about reviewing the processes that we've agreed to, and then also collecting any data from SDS sheets to plans that have been made perhaps in advance of that new person arriving, and even about the other permits you might have and the conditions therein. And once that takes place, there might be even some more questions about as you're walking around. Let me go talk to an operator. Let me go talk to a manager of a process to say, what exactly are your concerns? And oh, by the way, what do you do here? And how does that flow? And does that go down the drain, or does it go over here to this other issue? And knowing some of that in that site visit gives us the next step, and that really is to go back to the office and begin to focus on the regulatory framing around that process. And we'll look at everything from air, water, waste, plans, and even if you want to, incorporate some safety as well. But we can do all of that and move forward.
So all RASs aren't the same, so you can actually curtail it to whatever the facility is.
Exactly.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's awesome. So can you provide an example of a RAS report to an audit report?
A recent one? We've just,
Yeah.
I had a recent one. It was a small facility that they don't have an actual environmental person on site, so they were curious. They had a vague idea of what might apply to them, solid waste. They had a diesel tank, so they thought SPCC might apply. So what I did is go out there, walk through the site with them, and then sit down, and we covered a lot of these these rules here: stormwater, wastewater, air permitting. Air permitting was a big one at this particular site. We just walked through it and provided the report afterwards, and they are working through the compliance side of that.
Okay.
And for me, I'd say a recent one really focused was a new process that a client was ready to implement and get started with, and they wanted to know in advance about what they were getting into and would they be triggering anything else. It was along the same lines that Jennifer mentioned with solid waste and stormwater and SPCC potentials, and even the air permitting side. And I think we achieved some good notions about what exactly they needed to do next, and they have a good direction forward.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, well, it's quiz time. So wake up everybody out there. So we have a really quick quiz. Let me get the poll out. It's kind of interesting. So the first question is, a substance that is a flash point greater than 150 degrees is a hazardous waste. And that is true or false. And so you can go ahead and answer that really quick question. And so we're going to take bets. What do you think they're going to say? Are they going to say yes or are they going to say no?
I'm going to vote
I'm just
true.
a marketing guy. I have no idea.
I'm voting
So.
true.
Well, this isn't supposed to be a trick question, but I could see some of the really high-level professionals out there saying, well, it could be both. But realistically, what we're asking is on the level of this thing called ignitability within the RECRA standards. And if you want to look at that, that's 40 CFR Part 60.262, and you'll see some definitions where that sits. But there's a number of issues to that, and it's important to recognize 150 degrees is not a flashpoint people recognize a lot, but that's diesel fuel, folks, and that's kind of where that comes from.
Okay, so the results are 63% said yes, it is, and then 38% said no. So thoughts on our answers, or?
I can tell you it's no.
Okay, well that's actually good. So there's a lot of people out there that hey, they might need a RAS. Just saying.
Well, even you can get to definitions about what flashpoint is, but there's actually a test method for doing flashpoint, and it's 141 degrees Fahrenheit is the threshold. So if you get that above 141, you're not a hazardous waste. If you're below 141, you are. So that's in essence the answer.
All right. Well, gold stars for 38% of you, so very good.
Very good.
Very good. And then, okay, so let me get to the next one. So our recent WAS work, we already kind of go over this
We went over
already?
some of it. Yeah, we had another one, a railway facility. Same thing, just walking through and helping the people on site go through their process and figure out if SPCC applies, if they have a stormwater outfall, if they have any particular wastewater on site. And I will say one of the ones that I have noticed people miss a lot from personal experience, I probably shouldn't say that, from a long time ago, is the public water supply.
Oh, indeed.
It doesn't take much if you don't have city water to be considered a public water supply. And we're not even talking about drinking water necessarily. You can have a toilet with well water in it, and you'd be a public water supply. So that sort of compliance, it is. And applicability is one that a lot of people miss. So yeah, that's always on our RAS list.
Okay, cool. So it's our second quiz. So the Clean Water Act requires that operators of discharges associated with industrial activity obtain a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or an NPDES permit. So this is true or false. So again, you have 50% chance of getting this right. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this question here. Sorry. So you can take a few more minutes. So,
We had the same split as last time.
I don't know. Well, I bet we'll have less people answering this time. That's probably what's happening.
It's long. It's too much to read.
That was a mouthful. I always get nervous when I have to read something like that. So.
NPDS. Yeah, that's a long one.
Yeah.
I always trip over spelling that out when I'm doing training.
Okay, so right now it looks like 90% of people saying that is true. So what's the answer?
True.
The answer is true.
True.
Yay.
90%, all right. Water is always.
And we actually had more people vote this time.
I like it.
You were wrong,
way to
Lance.
go, guys.
You're wrong.
Hey, just a bit of trivia, just to let you know. Jennifer was talking earlier about just the sheer number of regulations that are out there, and there was an assessment about how many or what percentage fell in the air and the water and the waste in a federal kind of point of view, and it was over 60% were air related, and unfortunately that is adding to on the federal level. Even in recent administrations and the like. So you can tell where EPA's focus is at. It's rolling right on down to the states, and all they're doing is either implementing or trying to make sense of it. Out here in Texas, I think we have a really favorable environment for that. But at the same time, 60% air, that's a place that needs some scrutiny, and it's hard to keep up with. That's for sure.
Okay, so I'm going to hide the results now.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Okay, so RAS versus audit. I guess this is the big question here. So a lot of people are saying, you know what you're saying sounds a lot like what an audit might be. What's the difference? So who wants to take?
Let me address that first, if you don't mind, because it's sort of technical, and even though it sounds fairly easy. But in an audit, let me start easy with the first thing. The RAS is that simple screen, high level. Do you apply this regulation or don't you? But of course, during that site visit, you're observing things, right? You know what's going on with activities, and are they doing the right thing? Are we keeping the right paperwork? Well, guess what? That's not that's not an audit. I'm sorry, that is an audit. That's not a RAS. The audit, though, turns that around and says, all right, I want to find out if you're compliant or not. And so and those things turn into what's known as findings. And findings are real critical because they become a point of argument. They give you a point of action. They become a point of necessity. And really a grade, if you will, in a lot of cases. Fortunately, we have some features to work with those. I think Jennifer can answer that better than me, but there's a lot of issues about auditing that allow you to not be able to get out of being able to call that a compliance issue or a non-compliance issue. Where the RAS, you're talking about those observations you made are strictly that. I think the term observations is used at least to say it's something we saw. We didn't dive into. It's an opinion, and that opinion then is not based on anything more than our reflection of it. And therefore, you're kind of outside of the bounds of that. But maybe, Jennifer, you can talk about some of the protection issues.
Yeah, I wanted to talk, or I guess expand on our definition of a RAS. And it really is, like you're saying, it really is a high-level screen to see what regulations might apply to your processes versus measuring your compliance level with those rules. So we're not going to say, oh, you don't have inspections from May through June. We're going to say, you need a stormwater permit plan with inspections required. That's kind of how we address it. I will say, we have started, I had one of these, a RAS for a small company, and we decided, instead of going into the RAS before we started, we decided it might actually be a better idea for them because they weren't sure about their compliance at all. They hadn't had anyone looking at it for a long time. They decided maybe it'd be a better idea to go through the Audit Privilege Act that Texas provides, which allows them to do a true audit, do an actual audit versus a RAS, and then report their findings to the state and fix them within a reasonable amount of time and be protected under the Audit Privilege Act. So there are opportunities when we start this RAS, as long as you do it before you start the actual RAS. Don't do it after. If you decide you want to have that protection, to go in through the audit privilege versus the RAS.
Okay, so we have a question from our audience. Do you have a list of questions or a checklist that you would use for a RAS when you're using the RAS?
Well, we have a couple different versions, quite frankly, and I think as we tailor the RAS to what the client needs, absolutely we're going to use some, if you will, canned questions or canned checklist issues. But there's more to it than that, and there's always a little follow-on is the way that I've conducted them in the past, to say, all right, let's just explore that a little bit further, at least to understand the breadth of what exactly the process is, because they are all unique, and that's the blessing we live in with the industry we've got.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you want to add anything, Jim?
I agree.
So here's a question that I have. So if one of our listeners out there says, hey, I want to get a RAS, would they need to get an audit after that? Or does one override the other? Or
So I still think that I would look at them as almost completely separate
I agree.
items, honestly, because the RAS, again, is that high-level screen to see what applies to my facility. For example, is there a diesel tank on site that's 5,000 gallons? That's going to trigger SPCC. Where an audit would say you have an SPCC plan on your site with required inspections, and you're not doing your inspections, so that's a finding from the audit.
Well, that's a great question, and it goes to the idea about the audit difference again, and the audit, that protocol, and I think the question that came in is all about the checklist. Well, yeah, the protocol for an audit is going to be canned and set depending on what you're trying to match, and for ISO and for responsible care, and even for things like PSM and RMP, there's a set of issues to go down and questions to follow. The latitude we have in the RAS is we can go where we need to go and tailor it accordingly, and stay away from some of the delicate issues if there are any. But yeah, I'd say that example Jennifer gave is right on. That's a great example of how we define the two.
okay, so after you do a visit, after everything is done, what's next? What's the next step?
Well, I think that again, we're in the business of consulting, and we want to match what the client wants. And so typically, we're going to provide a letter report. And inside that letter report really is this report table that is the gap analysis. And that issue is presented and lists all the details of what regulations we covered, how it was made applicable or not, and what observations made it that way that we saw or discovered. And if there's recommendations we can make and even requested to make, then we're going to make those and try to give you the best of our knowledge about what experience we've seen and how best to comply with the issue that we see applicable.
So we have one more quiz for our audience. So after your RAS, are you obligated to report your observations?
You almost said findings.
I almost said
didn't you?
findings, but I've learned that that's a no.
Observation.
So observations. So we're going to go ahead and launch this quiz here and see what we have. So.
I think we've got a good audience. We should be in there.
All right, look at that. We're seeing the results come in live.
And we have another strong said, 80% of the people are saying no, you do not have to.
Yes, and that is that key word there, that findings.
Observations.
Oh
See,
man, Lance
again.
did it again. Yeah, that observations versus findings. These are observations, a screen to see what applies, not a finding that something was out of compliance.
And recognize that if you did choose to go down the Audit Privilege Act for the RAS that we're doing, then you're still always protected with those things too, and you can move forward with however you'd like to report them. I think that, like anything else, what's the right thing to do with a lot of these things is to try to address them. And I think Jennifer used the term in the most appropriate amount of time, and sooner the better, but obviously these are get to compliance, and we're here to help with that.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and go to our, after the art, so we might have already kind
This
of
is
talked
just a good
about
summary
this.
of the final report. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So does anybody want to kind of add anything to that, or that we've kind of missed? Or?
Well, don't be surprised, and I think it's worthwhile mentioning to folks that are considering a RAS on the tail end of this, that understand that this is where you want to request at the beginning about what kind of report you'd like to see and what features you want to see in the report. We can take things out, we can move things around, we can get them where you need to be, and if you want more detail about a recommendation, or even call it an executive summary. I only want to see their recommendations, and that's fine. I think that we can help with you addressing when and how, options about how to, if the recommendation is to, write an SPCC plan or perform inspections on areas that haven't been looked at. We've got some internal tools at least to help with that too.
Okay, here's a question for me, just because it's probably a dumb question, but can anybody do a RAS, or do you have to have specific qualifications to do it, or
It's really helpful to have quite a bit of experience in going through reading the rules that actually apply and understanding how to then apply that mountain of rules to that particular site. So yeah, I think it's really helpful to have a really strong background in industrial compliance.
I concur. I think that there's and whether we've got send out a person who's got a dramatic amount of air experience or water experience, we're going to back it up with the strengths of WM across our platform. And that's where I think we really shine. I'm new to the organization, about 3 months, but there's a few reasons for even joining. They're all about the strengths that we possess, and I think we can offer that to our clientele in spades about what exactly they're going to get and in the experience level to fortify their compliance.
We call this the RAS webinar, you don't know what you don't know. So if somebody's out there going, I don't know if I need a RAS or not, would you say just who they need to call, or what would be their first step, or would they know? If you know you need a RAS or not?
I think if you're questioning it, you probably need to figure out if that means you have some inkling that there's something out there in those environmental laws that's going to apply to you, whether you have a diesel tank on site or you happen to have a furnace with air emissions. There's a reason you're asking. And
the regulatory landscape is changing. Recent decisions even by EPA to rescind the definitions of the waters of the United States was critical, and that was on the heels of 18 months earlier them coming forward to strengthen that. And so there's always that give and take what's going on. We pride ourselves on keeping in touch with the regulations, and so should all the clientele. But for those people that just don't know and maybe haven't looked at their process in a detailed way, I'd say to your question about who should, I'd say that's the likely candidate, because it's fast, it's applicable issues, it's not an audit, and you can find out right away where you sit and walk away with a great deal of confidence that you're on the right track.
We probably already talked about this too, but generally, if somebody wants to do a RAS, generally how long does it take? Is it a 2-day process, a day process? It depends on the facility.
Depends on the facility for sure. Relatively short. The site visit's usually the longest, depending on how many processes you have and how much research has to be done. But
yeah, I'd say the scope means a lot. So are you going to look at the entire process, or maybe just that new area? And then, do you have documents in electronic form, or are they in a standard filing cabinet and fishing those out and trying to get those too? So there's a lot of things that go into it. One thing that the site visit, prior to the site visit, the client meeting, if you will, is all about to understand what you have, and so we can properly assess how long it's going to take. But in most cases, it's fairly quick. The site visit, a day, maybe 2, but more like a day, and going from there.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, we have one last quiz for our listeners, and because 4th of July is coming up really quick, like Tuesday, which Tuesday holidays are always a bummer, aren't they?
Hey, man.
Wednesday's worse.
Wednesdays are worse, yes. So the question that I have for you guys is, when is your holiday starting? Is it starting tomorrow at 5? Is it starting Monday at 5, or is it starting as soon as this webinar is over? Which I really wanted it to be for me, but
it's not happening.
That didn't happen. So.
I love it.
Well, driving in, it was getaway day today.
Hey, the good news is so far 50% are saying as soon as we end. So we should
that's great.
We should just kind of keep it going for about 30 more minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do have one more question from the audience. it sounds like an audit is more, I'm sorry, it sounds like an audit is more formal than a RAS. Would there be a difference in cost between the two?
Oh, yes. And in large part because of the standard protocol that you're going to follow in an audit. And don't get me wrong, I think anything any subject could be an audit, a regulation that you want to treat as an audit. But in most cases, if you looked at the Federal Register or even the 40 CFR, you see how long these are. And therein lies the questions that you create. And that detail just means more time to get through. So the short answer is the audit's longer.
Okay, so
RAS is much cheaper. Cheaper.
we don't like that word.
Not use the word
You don't
much.
like that word that I say findings. We don't like cheaper.
Less involved.
I tease. Well, I think, guys, that's all we have. Does you want to close with anything, or what the next step should be for just to call you guys? Would you guys be the?
I'd say that any of our division managers can do it. Certainly, Jennifer and myself, we're used to being called for this. In fact, in most cases, when we start talking to a client, that's one of the areas we ask: is a RAS the right thing for you? And just to our audience, I'd ask yourself that same question: is it right for you? It very well could be.
Okay. Well, Jennifer and Don, thanks for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedules and putting this together. We usually run around trying to make sure that everything is correct, and I just found out right now that we're missing a slide, and it's usually where you can contact Don and Jennifer or ourselves. But if you want to go to our website, www.wh-m.com. But I am going to be sending you guys a letter that attended that'll have all that information on. So we wish you a happy 4th of July weekend and be safe out there.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.